Yay. Okay, cool. All right. Are we coming back?
Ready to come back?
Yep. Just bring me back in and I'll have Phil.
I know I'm only on 1 day a week. I get it. I'm going to jump on GarageBand and start sawing something together. This is the HAL SPARKS show. Wow. And a guitar note. And then
try turning it off and turning it on again.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Hey, Hal.
Yeah.
Did you mean something
Hold on.
like this?
This
There
is
you
the
go.
HAL SPARKS show. Wow. And a guitar note. And progressive. And all that. Yeah, it's going to be good.
Hold on.
The HAL SPARKS radio program, MEGAWORLDWIDE.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Welcome back to the show. Now, I think I remedied it. It was a good old-fashioned, just like all I had to do was run outside in my socks, throw a breaker, and come back in, and then it seemed to be all right. And that was enough not only to fix the audio, but to bring our dear friend Philip Ittner in. That's apparently what was doing it. There was this sort of like clog in the internet that kept us right. So, welcome, Philip. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm all right. Buggy internet, perhaps. I don't know. My end or yours? I don't know.
It might take a little while to kick in. It could very well be, it could be in the system where I am. That's the thing. There are just so many moving parts. You can't get too caught up in any of them. You can just throw the switches you can throw and hope for the best. Now, that said, let me, if I may, I want to bring up a story. I just shared it with Johnny Million a little bit ago, and this is right out of the gate. Philip Ittner, for those of you that are just joining us, is live in Kiev in Ukraine right now. And I think the biggest story over the last 24 hours is the fact that Russia makes a big to-do out of signing this grain deal to allow grain exports to get out of Ukraine. Finally, and kind of setting the world at ease a little bit. Like in the middle of all this stuff, they're going to do something human and allow this grain to get out. And then they strike the port of Odessa. They fire on it with 4 missiles, 2 of which were shot down by anti-missile technology by the Ukrainians, 2 of which strike but miss their alleged target of the grain silos or the storage areas, and hit just some of the pumps and the for refueling the ships and other stuff, which would, by the way, cause a cascading explosion had they not, had they worked effectively. So what's the word on the street there? I'm just kind of catching people up on that story as I'm reading it. Did I get anything in the immortal words of Rachel Maddow? Did I get anything wrong in that exchange?
No, I mean they made an agreement to create a corridor for grain shipments to go out, and then they attacked Odessa in particular. So, they're not in breach of an agreement that they made, because the corridor itself ostensibly is free, but they can continue to attack Odessa, the port from which any shipment in that corridor would come. So
I'm going to go with, in terms of treaties, a distinction without a difference. That we didn't shoot the corridor, we just hit your ships is not going to fly either. You know what I mean? We didn't kill anybody involved in the harvesting or anybody involved. We just killed the sailors on the boats. Wouldn't fly. It's the same thing. So I mean, I find it disgusting, but not surprising. I was momentarily shocked, but not in that they did it in my own naivete. Probably,
Well, it's their MO. It's their MO. They do this all the time. They set up conditions so that they can appear to be reasonable, and then they, shoot out for an objective that they really want, which is, again, and they've made it perfectly clear, they would like to see a food crisis, because it plays into their interests. Yeah. So they're very, very good at gaslighting. They're extremely good at gaslighting.
Well, I mean, and that is, effectively, there's got to be a return on investment issue with that, though, right? There has to be a point where you can't go much further in that direction before the world says all bets are off. You could argue that is we're if not close to it, that the initial attack in February was the world waking up to that. And there's some elements of sort of normal leftover, like, all right, we got to have a peace deal. Maybe if they're willing to talk. Even still, people are not as open to the idea of negotiating with the Russians the way they may have been over the last 8 years, say, because, I mean, you have to have a foot out the door with these guys.
Well, I mean, it's what they do. It's what they do. They they want to they want to have they want to have their cake and eat it too. I guess is one way of putting it. But it's not as simple as that, because they do want to pretend that they care about international norms, international law, and be in breach of it when it's in their interest.
Right.
So, and they'll want to scream about the international community, in particular the United States, when it is in breach of international law, but they don't want to adhere to it themselves either. So they are experts at gaslighting, and we thought when the fall of the Soviet Union happened, we thought that they would be willing participants in the international order for whatever, for better or worse, whatever that means.
Well, you at least have to give them the chance. That I think there was a lot of dubious nature of it, but the idea is in when you're acting in good faith, there's a lot you gotta do to prove it, especially when you've been hostile enemies. So we were willing to, in exchange for the elimination of mutual assured destruction as a primary, precursor to all diplomatic relationships with the USSR. That was the first element of it. Before you could even get to, well, can you guys produce food? Will we get it to the market? Blah, blah, blah. You had to deal with the fact that we were at guns at each other's heads for 40 years. So of course you're going to deal with that first, right? So the question, I have is that have they outlived their usefulness at the same time that they have worked everyone's last nerve?
Well, unfortunately, they're too big to ignore. So you can't. What you want to try and do is bring them to the table as a willing participant in the global order. But unless they're willing to play by certain rules, look. This is so complex and so difficult because you don't. Their argument has always been respect us. We want to be a participant, but we want to have a seat at the table to decide what the rules are, so that we can manipulate those rules in our best interest.
Right.
Which arguably the United States does as well, but. What needs to be agreed upon is that everybody has to come to a place where they're kind of like, I don't want to say we don't want to
deals with worse people, right?
Yeah, but it's like there are certain standards which you must uphold, because if you're playing Monopoly, if you decide to sit down around a table with a bunch of people who are going to play a game, everybody has to agree to the rules of the game. And even if upon occasion somebody can kind of throw their weight around and bend those rules to break the rules, you get to a point where nobody's going to play by. We're not playing a game.
Right.
Then what we're doing is it's just sheer force. And their modus operandi, their fallback position is force is justifiable in and of itself. They understand the pretext of having rules, but if they don't want to, if ultimately their interests contradict those rules, they are perfectly willing to openly break the rules.
Right.
And this is where the dangerous stuff about international law and their argument about what we do on the global stage becomes this very tricky thing of like, well, do you really believe in the rules, or do you only believe in the rules when they're advantageous to you?
Right.
I would argue.
Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, I would argue that as much as the West and the Anglo-Saxon power structure, the hegemony that exists on the global stage can be used to the advantage of America or the Western powers, then ultimately you don't want to break the rules because, when it comes right down to it, you do want to have a system.
Well, you also
Russia doesn't understand that.
It comes down to also the essence of the system itself, because the participants in the system know that if you are talking about the kind of rules-based system that we're discussing, and you're talking about the like the nature of just international capitalism, not globalism, not kind of like this threaded supply chains exploitative version of it, but the idea that you guys do something well, we do something well. I'll give you what I do well, and you give me what you do well. That kind of trade, which has existed amongst peaceful countries for a long time and has been the primary thing that's kept them from warring when they've stayed stable for lengths of time. It's usually that kind of a trade-off. Maintaining that kind of relationship requires an arm's length. Even if you go, we're going to enforce the rules, intellectual property rules, we're going to, have trade tariffs if you violate those things, those kind of level of control technically, that keep the system afloat, is wholly different than the existence of Kaliningrad and the seizure of areas in Georgia, Chechnya, and the East and the Donbass region. This is not the same system. The Russian system is largely based on, look, we're not going to have anything worth trading once we run out of this stuff that's under our feet. And so at some point, we're just going to have to take what we want from what you got. And what we can do in that time is establish a military, take over places, and weaponize whatever resources you have for that kind of trade going forward, because it's not going to come from innovation. I mean, there was a joke this week where, Putin finally admitted, and I'm sure you saw this, that they were having trouble with their technological sector because of the sanctions, which, their technological sector.
Ultimately, when it comes right down, when push comes to shove, what Russia ultimately says, and it's got what this conflict I think has exhibited, is that when push comes to shove, what Russia is really about, and they openly now say it, is that if I'm a bigger power, I have right to exert my influence over X, Y, or Z, because by right of I'm a bigger power.
Yes.
And even at the worst of us, even when we are at the worst of our more aggressive nature, interest on the global stage in the West, the great powers of the world, that ultimately that you cannot say might makes right, because then it's just a free-for-all.
Right.
And we've all seen instances where great powers have tried to achieve a global goal, and because of because of the rules-based order, that other powers say, no, you can't do that. And there's been negotiation as a consequence of that. And
I would argue the best example of that is the ban on chemical weapons. The chemical weapons themselves are seen as being some sort of especially cruel in a circumstance or whatever. They're absolutely not compared to having your body blown to pieces or bleeding out from shrapnel or any other thing. The difference is that there's less of a cost to the invading force if they can use chemical weapons because the infrastructure is intact and all you're doing is killing the people. And there's a certain level where people recognize that, look, if you're going to invade someplace, that you have to be willing to build it yourself. Otherwise, what's to stop you from biologically just wiping out an entire race or an entire group of people? Because you can just take their stuff now. You just sweep up the corpses and take their things. It's not because, dying of one of these things is somehow more peaceful or better, or it's better to have your house bombed than gassed. It's that you got to put more of a price tag on aggressive action, which includes if you blow this up, you got to rebuild it. And therefore, that shortens that fuse a little bit. And Russia effectively has weaponized that as well, which is we don't mind. We're just going to level everything.
Well, and that's why I think this war in particular has removed the veneer that Russia had of like being a willing participant in the rules-based order, because ultimately, and they openly say it now, it's gotten to the point where they've gotten rid of the whole denazification of Ukraine.
Right.
They've gotten rid of the.
Some people haven't gotten the memo, but yeah.
Yeah. But ultimately, if you're paying attention, ultimately they've gotten to the point of saying, we're going to take Ukraine because they're small and we're big.
Mm-hmm. Well, he even said, this is I want to say that he said, this is from Tass, there's no middle way between being an independent country and a colony. That you are one or the other. You are either a superpower or you are, whether you like it or know it or not, you are a colony of the bigger groups. And it's just a matter of when, not if. That if, and now the argument is not.
If you're Irish, which I'm sure if you're Irish, you love to hear. Yeah,
right. Well, or any of the, like the sub-Asian countries that are, geographically attached to China and the South China Sea, or if you're Pakistan looking at India, or if you're, or you're, quite frankly, and this is what he was.
It's a long list.
Yeah, what he was directly saying was there is no Ukraine. There is only the satellite illusion of Ukraine that's really ours. There is no Chechnya as a country. There is just a state of Russia that is either just lying to themselves or or we got to let them know that this is happening. Same thing with Georgia. And by the way, he has openly admitted, and we've watched this happen repeatedly, that the goal is to make all the other European countries slowly but surely colonies of Russia. That's what he's talking about. First, of course, Latvia, Lithuania, of course, all the border ones, and Poland, and then, the rest of them, we will negotiate as if they have a gun to their head, like France and Germany, and he was talking to Germany with that argument. Germany is a colony of Russia as far as he's concerned because of their dependence on oil and gas. That's it. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Okay.
Hold 1 second.
No, I would say
hold it until after the break because that's a tease. Sure. We'll be back right after this. It's the HAL Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. There we go. Because you guys can't hear the audio on that. I think that is part of whether he thinks it's a real thing or not is debatable. But that's part of what his language means.
I think he would argue that that it is basically Germany's either going to be a colony of the United States or it's going to be a colony of Russia.
Right, and that effectively because they need oil and gas, they have more of a tick relationship with Russia than they do with the United States. We have trade relationships. They need his stuff. That's and since you're talking about earlier that's the point of struggle. That's what his belief about where real power comes from. That would answer the question of who they're a colony of. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. I'm going to reset the connection to Chicago real quick, just to be sure.
I've got a couple questions in the chat already, Phil.
Sure.
Okay, and Chicago, I jumped back on, so Hopefully sound okay. Okay. Yeah, it's weird. Okay, thank you. It's like it can only go about like 8 minutes without freaking out. And there's no material reason why. Like it's the easiest part of the internet is audio as far as place to place. It's so odd. So anyways, we're going to have to remedy it in a material way. We'll be back. We're coming back right now. So give me a second. I'll let you know when the music is up. Welcome back to the show. Still with us is Philip Ittner, who is live in Kiev in Ukraine right now. And we talked about it a little bit during the break, but I teed this up is that, the question of whether or not Putin, at least, views Germany currently as a colony of Russia in terms of that conversation that he was saying. This is from TASS. He said this on June 9th, and this was part of his, I think he was speaking to that group of youth or whatever that was. Like, he's only really given 3 or 4 speeches during that time. They're really doing a big push about him being healthy and out and about because he had to go down to Iran. We'll talk about that trip in a second too. But the idea that, does he basically say that if your energy needs rely on Russia, you're basically a colony?
Well, and it's a zero-sum equation.
Right.
And that is the problem, is that Russia sees power as a zero-sum equation.
Right.
Somebody is on top, somebody's on the bottom.
Yeah.
Which means ultimately that even a power like Germany or France or Great Britain or, take your pick,
Yep.
that if there is a dominant power, which is why they are, when they talk about NATO, for example, they do not see NATO as a partnership, an alliance. They see it as a way for America to exert its influence over lesser powers, and that ultimately NATO is just the U.S.
Right.
That really is what they think. And if France has a problem with America, ultimately because America is the greater power, that they will make France heel to American power. They literally 100% believe that either somebody gives the orders and somebody receives the orders.
Right.
That's it. That's all there is to it. And for a very long period of time, I actually said, well, you know what, as much as we like to pretend otherwise, that ultimately, there is dominance and then there is somebody who is calling the shots and somebody who is receiving those orders. But the world doesn't work like that. No. It is far more nuanced.
Yes.
And the Russians don't get nuance. They really don't. Well,
I would respectfully say that they can't afford to. And I'll explain it this way. New York has always had this kind of brash, tough attitude that New Yorkers don't take any guff and they'll tell it to you like it is, unlike LA where people are a little more loosey-goosey with stuff. Yeah. Well, in terms of the media world and business, it's so expensive and you are constantly in this dog-eat-dog environment in New York that you barely have time for it. You don't have time for anybody's BS because you are fighting off so many forces just to keep afloat because the New York real estate market is, you're spending $3,000 a month for a closet that has a sink in it. You can't afford to go out on a limb with anybody really in that regard. Whereas in LA, you kind of can, and you have for a long time, a lot of other cities. And I would say that arguably maybe that's part of the mentality of Russia in that it's so hard there because they have chosen not to, or they culturally are averse to the idea of innovating their way out of any problem other than war, or, which is basically creating a problem of their own making. That they have just blown that part of life off, and they're effectively like New Yorkers of the worst order. It is dog eat dog. It is Darwinism as a constitutional order, and therefore that's the lens they seem to see the world through.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And that's why, again, there is something to that worldview of like, let's just chuck all the ideals of negotiation or win-win,
Right.
or you get this, I get that, and we call it a day, and we both walk away, and somebody goes home with what they want, and the other person goes home with what they want. There's a negotiation, and there's a place where you can kind of walk away from a negotiation having both achieved something.
Yeah.
But Russia's mentality is, no, you are either the winner or the loser. There is no middle ground. And it is a I don't want to say it's a persuasive argument, because ultimately it doesn't work, because that's not how human beings in a really better functioning society,
Right.
human beings do come to an accommodation.
But
there is something to be. I mean, I keep going back to my Lincoln quote of basically either we're going to try to negotiate with other human beings and come to an accommodation where you get a little something, I get a little something, and we strive for that.
Right.
Or we just chuck it all out the window and say might makes right, and I'm either the dominant and you're the submissive,
right?
Or
in a less connected world, I would argue that in a less connected world, you could get away with that for a lot longer. Because if people had fewer issues, even calling in reinforcements or finding support or getting their message out or letting people know you're in distress, the levels of ability of doing that in a modern society versus what it was in the 1800s or even the 1970s are wholly different. And the reality is, and I think there is no way, I'll put it this way, there is no way that the UK at MI6, that the EU's security group, that the United States intelligence community, and I would argue even the Chinese intelligence community, is not looking at Russia for the danger that it is and goes, look, at some point they might drop the gun under the president that they have at my head under the pretext that we're all going to go back to playing nice. But I'm not buying it this time. That you can fool me once, you won't get fooled again. And I think a lot of them are saying we kind of slowly walked through this for years since 1991. We gave them the benefit of the doubt again and again, even when it entailed the Georgia, even when it entailed Chechnya, even when it became the Donbass area. Yes. And then this attack and the language that they are using, the mask is off. They're completely unveiled for who they are, and you would be an ignorant.
If there is one thing, there's one thing that Putin has achieved.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people have gone into the whole kind of like, oh, did Putin overplay his hand? Oh, did Putin make... What Putin has finally done is made the world community realize that Russia is not playing by the rules of the rest of the globe.
That's right.
And that it is no longer a participant in a global order where they have a give and take. It's basically... I'm big and powerful. I have nukes. I can do whatever I want. And the rest of the world has got to either acquiesce to that, and then we're in a very different era in history, or they stand up to it and say, even though you are big and powerful and have nukes, that the world order cannot function that way, because there are little states which are legitimate, and they do not deserve to be overtaken by bigger states. And we kind of are now in a post-colonial world order,
right?
And either you play you swim in those waters, or I don't know if you can swim in our swimming pool.
Well, yeah. Well, I think that's also one of the things is like the idea of like removing them from the SWIFT system, removing them from the international banking system is somehow that like everybody has the right to be involved in a system that other people put up and maintain, that's healthy and that's functioning and that that serves the purpose that it's initially created there. you don't get to come back. Like, we know banks are available everywhere and people can use banks and you have the right to, you can open an account and nothing can stop you unless you're, a criminal. But the bank robbers can't go, wait, the store, the front of this thing says anybody can open an account. So I can come in here, whether I'm going to open an account or rob the place, is an absurdity. And that's where we are with Russia. That's where we are in the trust matrix with these guys at this point. That if the world order is actually going to function, if you're going to have a banking system that actually works, if you're not going to have weird loan money going through Deutsche Bank and ending up in the pockets of the NRA or Donald Trump, artificially shoring up people that will affect our political system when they have not earned it from the people of the country themselves. That's one thing. If you can convince a majority of people that you're worthwhile, that's up to you. But if somebody else is helping you do it under the table, then that's the illusion of worth and the illusion of power. And we have every right to push back on that. The question that, I see going forward is that, if there is, I see them getting driven completely out. I see this going until the Donbass is completely regained, and so is Crimea. Crimea is the next thing, I think. I think that's the big shocking move over the next couple of months. That's my personal feeling about the way things
We'll see. Crimea is tricky.
It is, but it's tricky to keep, too. It's tricky. If you get driven out, getting back in is really hard. And the only reason they got in last time is because they were basically caught not unawares, essentially. We'll see. I will say this. The central bank in Russia has cut interest rates. They had boosted them like everybody else. They cut interest rates this week. That's a sign that they know their economy is slowing down. That's a normal lever to get to flood money, back into the system. The problem that they have is that the money's no good anywhere else, and it's only good for one thing. So the average consumer is not going to get more for their money or get more goods available in that slowing down. It's not slowing down because there's an unemployment trend. It's because they're sending most, if not all, of their able-bodied males to get killed. And they're scooping people up that should be working at factories or laying asphalt or whatever. They're scooping those guys up and sending them in as cannon fodder because they're the older people that they don't care about missing. They're past they've already had their kids, so they're basically useless eaters. To quote the Kissingers of the world. Those are not the kind of decisions that we want made on our behalf. That's not how you and I want to live in a country. And I doubt that the people in Russia want this. So my thing is that once somebody has a gun at your head, like Russia has been doing for years, and they have it with Ukraine, at a certain point, if you haven't pulled the trigger, or you don't have the ability to pull the trigger in some ways, everybody's going to be looking for a way to subvert you. It's the difference between being robbed at gunpoint and being in a house where there's abuse. Eventually, somebody, if you're going to survive, you're going to find a way around it, out of it, or through it. And that's where the world is with Russia right now.
Yeah, no, and Russia has always lagged behind the rest of the rules-based order. Admittedly, a rules-based order that has been Eurocentric, Western society being the dominant power on the globe. But even in a global international order, which includes China and Japan and Korea, and is not simply a Western-based power, that they have always lagged behind in terms of it's in their best interest to play by these rules. And they've always lagged behind. They really have. And it's whether it's because of the Golden Horde, the Mongols of the 11th century, or skipping the Renaissance or the Age of Reason, or the communists and the Soviet structure. They've always been kind of playing by rules of the last century. Way oversimplified in saying
we
that.
have some questions, and we're already at the bottom of the quarter because
sure. Let's go for questions.
So
sure, absolutely.
We have to take a quick break, and I'll re-link up with Chicago to make sure our audio stays good. And so we'll be back right after this. This is the HAL Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide, and we're going to be back right after this break with some questions for Philip from our chat room. Okay, give me 1 second. I have to manually log back in every single time. Okay, There. So Chicago, I'm back. Sound okay?
Yeah, sounds fine.
Cool.
We haven't even talked about the situation on the ground. We got our nice little pocket down outside of Kherson.
Right.
Where
That's
they've
there was
encircled about 800,
Yeah,
800 Russian soldiers.
That's Ed's 3D Tech is asking that question, which is why I wanted to get to it. So we'll get there real quick.
It's crazy.
Yep.
Well, Mr. Nance just writing to me. What did
All right.
What did the Master Chief have to say here? Okay, fine.
Send him our love.
I will. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we'll.
they're not winning.
No, hold on to that thought because that part of it, there was a lot of back and forth about the possibility of that because of the certain assumptions about the reality of Russian disputed territories, that they're not being encircled if Russia's actually thank you if they've actually disputed this territory. But that turned out to be BS, which meant there was a big cavernous area where they hadn't had control of it, and now they're stuck. It's like it's like a half full circle, and that circle turned out not to be half full, so they're in the middle of it.
I am happy, you are happy. Let us be happy together. Whether the weather is cloudy or sunny, I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky. Let us get lucky together. Whether the weather is cloudy or breezy, I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. 'Cause isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you? Chugga chugga choo choo woo woo. I am smiling, you are smiling. Let us smile together. Whether the weather is cloudy or stormy, I will still be there in the morning. I'll be right by your side in the morning. I'll make you breakfast in the morning. I hope that you like cereal.
Yay!
Yay! So, yeah, you got to actually play it for Philip this time. I had to do a little bit of live mixing, but it worked. That said, first of all, two happy ending elements, and one of them pertains to our question right here. Ed's 3D Tech is saying, can you ask Philip if the Russian army is surrounded in a certain place and about to surrender in large numbers? That's I'm tell everybody about that. That's Kherson.
So there's a pocket just southeast of Kherson where there's a counteroffensive going on to recapture Kherson. Now, Kherson fell at the beginning of the war from very dubious, from really a lot of very questionable elements, in that what a lot of people think was actually Russia's overall plan for the entirety of Ukraine, which was to have people inside Ukraine who would then open the door and let them just march on in. And it did work in Kherson. And but Kherson is about 77% Ukrainian.
Yeah.
Ethnically Ukrainian. And so they have, since the beginning of the war, or the grander war, since February 24th, have been conducting a lot of not overtly like partisan warfare, but they have been very much subverting Russia's power there. And now there is this pocket of about 800 Russian soldiers who have been cut off and encircled at a little area about, I want to say it's about 70 miles southeast from Kherson, and they cannot reconnect with Russia,
is that
with the rest of the Russian forces in the east. And they're either gonna have to break out and connect, or they're going to have to surrender. There have been requests for what's called a green corridor to let them, like was given to Ukrainians, to be fair, around Mariupol. But they're not.
Yeah, that's different though.
They're stuck.
That's letting soldiers reconnect with other soldiers is different than creating a corridor so that civilians can leave. These are not. That's a wholly different thing. And the idea that
wounded soldiers,
right. That's fine. Yeah, if they need to get people to military evac, absolutely. I mean, talk about a good faith, gesture. Yeah, remove your
But
wounded.
letting them out so they can reconnect with Russia's main
It's just
military
ridiculous.
force and then turn around and fight you again. No.
Yeah, so Alexei Arestovich, the advisor to the head of the president's office, confirmed the encirclement of a group of Russian troops in the Kherson region and the Yevskopol region. He spoke about this during a live broadcast with Mark Fagan. We partially took Olgino and almost completely Potemkino. These are two settlements to the right and left of Yevskopol. I'm going to go with that. Is Yevskopol. So they're, in fact, a repetition of Ivansk for the Russian troops because they are about 1,000 fighters with weapons and military equipment. They are in tactical environment. Yesterday, there was their attempt to break out from that was suppressed by our fire. They returned back and were surrounded by three quarters with fire and control of the only exit. They are stuck, and they're saying there's about 1,000 in there, and they've got gear. Yeah. Yes, I said medical evac, just to clarify, Stefan, if I misspoke, I apologize. The situation is mirrored in Yovansk, the Russian command, and there is, this is a quote from them, treacherously violated the agreement and shot at our troops. We have a very big temptation to bury them all in this cauldron. But firstly, we are fighting differently than the Russians. We do not break our word. Secondly, I think that the high humane armed forces of Ukraine will simply offer them to surrender. This will be the best way out for them, to surrender their weapons and equipment to stay alive. This is a war, and no one will fuss. We will not provide a corridor. If they do not want to surrender, their fate will be decided. I mean, it's a war. You invaded a country. If you're not going to surrender once you're encircled, your option, I suppose, as an invading force, is to go down swinging. And
they're so deep. They're so deep in Ukrainian. Ultimately, they're so deep in Ukrainian territory, which, because the Russians have emphasized the Donbass so much, because that's ultimately what they really have been fixated on.
Right.
That when Ukraine is doing a counteroffensive in Kherson, that they have got these 800, 1,000 soldiers basically cut off. And there's no force pushing in to give them relief or to create a corridor. They're screwed. Sorry, but they're screwed.
Yes.
And then there's so much is going on right now where we haven't even seen the full counteroffensive yet, and already we're seeing the Russians in really difficult situations, whether it's that pocket outside of Kherson, whether it is the announcement that we're going to be sending more HIMARS. I mean, Russia has been saying that they actually have destroyed HIMARS when we have pretty reliable information that that's not the case.
Right.
The tide, oh boy.
Yeah.
I don't like saying categorically this, but it does look like the tide is to switch.
Right.
And we'll have to see how it goes. But the Ukrainians have been suffering under the offensive of the Russians for the better part of the last 2 months, 3 months, when the Russians decided to pull back away from Kiev and to emphasize the Donbass. The Ukrainians have been taking it and taking it and taking it. And the entire time they have been getting everything in order for a counteroffensive. And
this encircling would be an example.
This is not the counteroffensive yet.
No, but the encircling of these troops, the liberating of territories that are even beyond where the troops are, which is effectively look at it as the line has been breached and they've been surrounded because the line was pushed back behind them. Is what happens when you undermine their ability to refit, resupply, and rearm their troops and give them materials, and they get stuck out there with no bullets, no rounds, no mortars. They've expended everything, and there's nothing to bring in. In a matter of time, they don't have the stores like the Ukrainians did that happened on their territory. And the Russians didn't think they needed it. Now there's a couple more questions, and we only got 4 minutes left.
Quick questions, and then I guess we're going to have to really go to questions after the radio. But let's go for it. Give me a question.
Johnny, yeah.
All right, so the question that got pushed from last week from, I don't know the name, but it reads like Peter Imbrat, is about the Antonovsky Bridge that the Ukraine just hit in Darvka. It's very
Yeah.
important for Russian tanks and
Rivka?
resupply.
There are three
just
bridges.
wants to
There
know
are
more
three
about it.
bridges over the Dnieper, and the Russians have moved many of their forces to the western side of the river because that is actually part of what is the Kherson Oblast of Kherson. So what they are trying to do, the Russians, is to get Kherson Oblast to under the gun, like they did in Crimea, go for a referendum and take the entire oblast and saying, well, we're now Russian, we voted for it, it's legit, even though the referendum would be under the gun. And because part of Kherson Oblast is on the western side of the river, they've actually inserted their forces on that side. But if the Ukrainians are able to cut them off from the river, because there are three bridges, well, there's two bridges and then there's the dam at the Dnieper. If they are able to cut the Russian forces off on the western side of the river, then they will have a pocket of maybe 3,000 Russian soldiers. And so there is talk of them destroying those bridges so that they can cut off the Russians on the western side of the river and then just basically do the same thing that they're doing at this pocket southeast of Kherson, which is to cut them off, surround them, and force them to either surrender or ultimately be destroyed.
Right. I mean, we're talking about a war, and a war of choice where they entered the country. These are the kind of things that are actually happening. And it's, again, why I don't wish violence on anybody on a personal level, because it's awful. It's always awful. No. But in these particular situations, this is the expectation that they should have. The irony is that they probably did not outfit their soldiers with enough stuff, because they overestimated their competence and their ability to take the country, because it was based largely on the ego of the people in charge instead of actual tactical decisions on the ground. Let's grab another question real quick. We only have a minute left, so let me use this minute to remind everybody that Philip is on Twitter at Philip Ittner, 1 L in Philip, 2 T's in Ittner. If you have any questions there, it's a good way to do it, and maybe we can set up a series on his YouTube channel where he can answer questions that people give him on his Twitter. You know what I mean? That, you can kind of go through, and that'd be an easy shoot for you to do. Build up some content. Here I am producing your show already. It's lovely. I'm so glad to help. And Johnny Million at Johnny Million. Without the one, you don't need a one on there anymore. It's the only Johnny Million you need. I'm at HAL Sparks. This is the HAL Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide. I'm here every Saturday. We live stream it as well at infotainmentwars.com and, of course, at twitch.tv/HAL Sparks and on my Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, God help you, but you can go to the HAL Sparks page and watch the show there as well and contribute. We will see you guys next week. Thank you, Chicago. And I am committed to solving my audio issues by next week. I will nail it. I'm going to. We're going to figure it out. We'll be back next week with Bite Air Audio. And scene. It's like juggling chainsaws while trying to do the show. And and quite frankly, I get it, I get so relaxed because my regular show. Thank you, Chicago. See you soon. We'll solve it this week. Devin and we'll hook up and solve it. I'll talk to you guys later.
Sounds good.
Okay. I get so used to doing my show, which I've worked out most of the kinks on. I mean, there's definitely issues here and there. But comparatively, it's nothing. And then I get spoiled by how well that works comparatively. And then when we start doing this, I'm like, and there goes my hand, and I gotta, doing the show one-handed. Can Hal juggle? Yes, I can. Nothing sharp though, because I play guitar, and that's just ridiculous.
I mean, I'm one of the primary reasons for going back to the States is to get all my ducks in a row and kind of refit and get new equipment and things like that, and then hopefully when I return, do this better.
Right? Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah, but there's stuff is the availability of stuff is growing all the time. There are still some things that are outside the norm of even the prosumer stuff that's out there that you do have to take that one weird extra step still to this day. And like I said, the mix minus is always the biggest issue. Yeah. So, I'm like, and I can see it affect even just having the browser open with the audio coming out of it affects the software that I use a little bit. And that's part of why we digitize, I think, maybe possibly. So that's not important. The important thing is we have 4 questions and we want to pound through those. So Johnny Million can go on a run or something, go do his Josh Hawley impersonation, his Josh Hall ass. And you got to take care of your kitty cat. Yeah, Chud came over, by the way.
3 left, I think.
Okay, great.
From Berkeley Dowd, which countries are providing the highest levels of support for the Ukrainian resistance currently?
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. and the Brits.
Yeah,
I would say, without a doubt, they're the biggest. Poland is in there, but by and large, it's the Brits and the Yanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and
this latest announcement from the White House has been met with a lot of very enthusiastic support. The fact that they're going to get more HIMARS, it's been. I mean, I saw Zelensky tweeted out earlier today directly thanking POTUS.
Yeah.
So it's the Americans. We got a good ally in Ukraine. After all this is said and done, they're going to be very thankful.
Well, and they're also going to be certainly, I guess technically they would be business deferential for us helping them exist, but also because we're not going to demand it. We earned it through being supportive of them having their own country, and none of us want
it's mutual. It's mutually beneficial.
Right. Exactly. So, I think that's a lovely thing. So,
absolutely.
Fingers crossed sooner rather than later.
As two former colonial powers, we get where we're both coming from, and I think we'll have a good relationship.
Right. So, let's grab another one real quick so we can.
Right, and then this one's really interesting. Are the January 6th hearings being reported there, and if so, what are they saying?
Very little. They're aware of it, but it's not the only reason they're paying very close. Well, the only reason they're paying any attention to it at all is because they are very much concerned about the midterms. And if the Republicans get back in power, there's concern that they will pull back in their support for Ukraine, because many Ukrainians do recognize that the GOP is less. I'm going to be very polite here. That the GOP is less inclined to help Ukraine and is more friendly towards the Kremlin than, say, the Biden administration or the Democrats are. So that's really the only that's the only way that it's on the radar here. They don't domestic politics in the United States. They respect as being domestic.
Right. Also, this week, just so people know, there was, I want to say 2 Americans, a Swede, and one other foreign fighter.
I love this joke. Did they walk into a bar?
You don't like this joke because they were killed in by tank fire.
This joke sucks.
Yeah, it's terrible. And they were fighting up in the Northeast, but they were pushing in behind enemy lines. These were guys who were effectively, either former Army Rangers or former Special Forces or working in that kind of stuff, retired and whatnot, and went there to fight because they can't stand what the Russians are doing. And they took a mission that was well into enemy lines and were successful in carrying out that battle for a good long while, but they were killed by tank fire. They're announcing.
The International Brigade is no joke. They are very active, particularly around Kharkiv.
Canadian. It was a Canadian.
Which is a very active. That's a very active battle zone, and the International Brigade is not for show. It's not. It's not just a press op. They really are out there fighting. I mean, when Malcolm Nance gets back, he will be part of an active combat unit. Whether or not he will be off the line as an intelligence officer, or whether or not he will be directly on the line, I'm not willing to talk about, but
Right.
they're not joking. The International Brigade is there fighting on the front lines.
Right. Yeah.
So
There's another question, Johnny, I think that we hadn't hit
Yeah,
yet.
yeah. Just the what is the thinking there of Hungary's Orban saying that Ukraine can't win the war because of the EU-US policy and action?
yeah, Orban is not making any friends
Anywhere.
anywhere. They don't. There is concern. I will not lie. There is concern here in Ukraine about fracturing within the European Union. I think that's why we see a lot of talk coming out of Zelensky's office about him hoping that the war will be over by the end of the year. Not because of what the Ukrainians can withstand, or not because of just a desire to end the war, but I think there is some realpolitik going on where they're like, will the alliance survive the winter? And we need the alliance.
Right.
We need people behind us. And Orban is not helping with that. And they're not, though. They're very much concerned about fracturing within the EU. And Orban is
See,
if there is going to be a divide within the EU,
it's going to come from him.
There's a good chance it'll start from there.
Right. I will say that this is also a time when the Orbans of the world, in terms of NATO, can feel because of the seriousness of the circumstance and their awareness of how the other countries, how seriously they're taking it, and also how the power dynamic might shift as Sweden and Finland are joining NATO, that this might be their last chance to negotiate some stuff for themselves by holding back support. So that's not that they're intending on a full fracture, but knowing that they do have bargaining chips, however limited in this situation. And quite frankly, Turkey's economy is kind of screwed right now. So that
and Hungary is going to Orban and Hungary are going to have to come to the realization that
they're next.
That they're on if they sidle up to Russia and Putin, they're on the losing side.
Right.
I think that might change things internally within Hungary, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
All right. I know that there are European Union, there are leaders within the EU who are already starting to say, like, hey, either, if you don't stand for what the rest of us stand for in terms of liberal democracy, which is the cornerstone of what the EU is supposed to be about, then are we really going to be participating with you in the Union? We might have to reassess whether or not Hungary deserves to be part of the EU. And if I'm Hungarian, that would give me pause.
There's a big difference between being the old, the British system, which has survived before on its own and thrived, in spite of the EU going the way of Brexit, which is definitely damaging to them, but not, completely dysfunctional from their way. They're used to it. It's not that long ago. With Hungary, a forcible Brexit for them effectively would suck. It's different to leave the party. It's another thing to be kicked out. And the financial negotiation power you have.
Yeah, and Hungary does not have the city of London.
Yes, no, right. I mean, Budapest is great if you're a spy. Apparently, it's a good place to meet up, and London has its pluses in terms of that as well. But there's nothing else going on.
It is one of the world's great economic centers. So even with a Brexit, they still have the city of London to fall back on. Hungary does not have anything.
London, city of sin that we grew up in. Right. There's a. Let's see. I think we got most of it. I think we got
one more.
I think we got them all.
We got them all. That's great.
Great.
I will say I'm going to let you go and thank you for joining us. Sorry about the technical aspects. Is very beautiful. I'm very jealous. You're very lucky. This is terrific.
I'll be back in the States shortly.
Well, yeah, keep us posted, and then until then, you're welcome. So, and even then,
I think I might have one or two more Saturdays.
Oh, I have one
Next
last
Saturday
question.
might be my last one.
One last one. The A10
Sure.
Warthog. Yes. The
Yes.
belief that they're finally training up on and going to get the A10 Warthog. Johnny, do you know what the
Yeah.
A10 Warthog is?
I ordered it once at the Outback, and it was too much.
Yeah, I don't believe that. I think you could finish it. I think you were just
Well, there's a
carbo
time
loading.
limit to get it for free.
That's true. That's I see. You're trying to game the system.
Yeah,
That's
I
different.
mean, I took it home. I finished it later.
Well, we all know that's true.
Yeah.
The blooming
yeah,
Warthog.
Yes, the
Yep.
blooming Warthog. So the A10 Warthog, if you ever hear the brap flyover gunner ship that you'll sometimes hear in war footage and that kind of stuff, that yes, the A10 is like people are pointing out in the chat called the tank killer.
It's a tank with wings. It's a gun.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
wow.
a gun. It's a plane built around a gun, and
As
then a
opposed to
tank
a-
built around a plane.
As opposed to building a really fast
I've
plane
seen,
yeah.
Yeah, no, I've been in Afghanistan and seen the Warthog in action, and it is, my God, the power of the A10 is incredible.
It is,
But
yeah.
there's a couple of things about the A10. You have to have air dominance to have the A10.
Mhm.
You cannot have active surface-to-air missiles. You cannot have other enemy aircraft in the region because the A10 flies very slow. It can take a lot of damage.
And it also can maneuver
I am
better.
100% behind sending
Yeah.
the A10s over here. 100% behind them. But it's not going to be the HIMARS. It will
No.
not be the game changer that, say, the HIMARS were. But
It's a-
to have A10s in the area, yes, absolutely, 100%.
Here's what I would argue is the point of the A10 there. Is the A10 is a cleanup weapon, meaning you bomb an area, there are still troops in there, you don't want to destroy the infrastructure entirely because there are civilians and that kind of stuff. So you send in planes to do, instead of strafe bombing or dropping bombs, that fire on an area, which is much more accurate but aimed at, it's an anti-personnel weapon. And it's also way more maneuverable. Even though it's not as fast, the tail can drift around. It can, almost turn on a dime.
And it can take damage. And if you wanted to get artillery lines, because right now what they're using the HIMARS is they're using the HIMARS to strike well behind enemy lines to get their supply and command and control. If they sent in A10s, the A10s, the Warthogs would go in and actually destroy artillery units that are close up on the lines. That are then, sending artillery ordnance against Ukrainian units, and it would be devastating. The A10s would decimate artillery lines, and you would lose. We would lose. The Ukrainians would lose pilots. They would lose A10s. People would die. It would not be like the HIMARS, where it's like we'll hide them, we'll bring them out when we need them, and then we'll shoot and we'll scoot and we'll keep them safe. The A10s, you would lose A10s.
Yes,
100%. People would be shot down.
The same way you lose a tank.
Ukrainian pilots would die, but they would be devastating. For every A10 that was shot down, you would, in my estimation, you would be doing serious damage to the artillery lines of the Russians. And so,
also, depending on how close you are to the enemy lines with your own troops, it is a strong aircraft that even if it's shot down, ejection from it and saving yourself is easier than, say, a helicopter, which falls like a stone, or a fast-moving, jet fighter, which is very high up, and therefore you could land behind enemy lines and yada, yada, yada. There's the crew of an A-10 can get out, in theory, because it's so strong. The underbelly is meant to be shot at.
And the A-10 cockpit is basically I mean, it's
capsule.
surrounded by armor. The whole intention of the A-10 is you're protecting two things. You're protecting that gun, that 30 millimeter Gatling gun, which is what the plane is built around. It's just a platform for the gun. So protecting that, and then protecting the crew. And it's a tank. I've seen A-10s land in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've seen them come in and just be riddled with bullets. And they come in, they land, and crews get to work on salvaging them or scrapping them for service for other A-10s. But the thing is a flying tank. It would be a powerful weapon in the hands of the Ukrainians, and one that could be quite useful.
I would say that, and I read some of the Jane stuff, like the defense stuff, because the idea is that, as someone who's against, in principle, the military-industrial complex, but also understands that security is a real thing, my radar is more tuned to that goes too far in the wrong direction. I like to be aware of, the blue thundering of our internal security is one of the things that I'm concerned with. Military gear for civilian areas and that kind of stuff. And so I read those things to see if any of those things are drifting that way. One of the scariest things I have read in terms of military advancements, and there's a lot of them, besides like microwave rays and all kinds of stuff like that they've been talking about, is an A-10 drone. They've been talking about this for a while, and a drone version of the A-10 would be the most frightening. And the idea that they would crank out 20 of them and not lose a pilot, so therefore just make them.
That gun, that 30 millimeter Gatling gun is one of the most awesome, devastating weapons I've ever seen.
It's crazy.
In operation and combat. It's it
brutal.
Tears stuff up, and it's been great. It's been great for the U.S. forces in the fights, in the wars that we've had post 9/11. But we've never utilized the A-10 in a theater of combat where the opposition has means to shoot it down properly.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's why I say, as enthusiastic as I am for having the A-10 sent over here, I'd rather have them here than mothballed, which is what I think that they're talking about, mothballing the majority of the fleet of A-10s. I'd rather have them here. But I'm under no illusion that you would lose pilots, right? You would lose planes. The Russians would shoot down A-10s. But it's like having helicopters. It's like having tanks. You're in a war. You're in combat. There are going to be losses,
right?
But it would be devastating to their artillery lines.
As much as I'm enjoying the armchair quarterbacking as well, this is a great conversation or whatever. I don't want to keep Johnny any longer than I have to. And the sun is going down behind you in a beautiful, beautiful way. We will discuss this on the Wednesday show. I have no doubt.
Sure.
And we'll go into it. Congress hates the A-10. I agree. But they know what it can do. And they know they're aware. The ones that matter are aware of its
The
worth.
infantry loves the A-10.
Exactly.
It
saved
military,
so many lives. That's when they call in air support. That's what they're hoping for. Nobody is real, especially when they're close. They don't want a jet fighter coming by and napalming an area or something like that. What they want is the A-10 to come in and be very specific. So that is what it is good for. That's it. It's just. Again, I think it's a cleanup weapon after they know they've expended all the anti-aircraft stuff, and that's what drones are for. You send the drones in, they use up all their anti-aircraft stuff on the drones, and then the A-10s come in and clean up. It's a strategy. It would work. I'm just saying, but we're all very smart everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So
until they get punched in the nose. That's right.
Respectfully, I will defer to those things. Love you.
Well, thanks
love you, Johnny
everybody
Million.
for listening to my gobbledygook, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday. Take care, Johnny. Good to see you.
Cheers. I may have another way for you to link up, Philip, on Wednesday. I may have another way. I'll send you a link this week.
Sure.
That makes it better. So, cheers.
Sure.
And thanks.
Take
thanks
care,
a lot.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
And there we go. Thanks, guys, for joining me, and thanks for being understanding as I'm putting out fires. It's nice to actually have other people on that can talk when I'm fixing this stuff as I go by, because then I don't have to, yammer while I do it as much as as I normally have to. And thanks to everybody who ended up in the chat last night for the Trump thing, which was skippy and weird as well, but again, a bore to a crowd of 5,200 that he was paid to be there for, like all the things that make. Thanks, I will, Stargal. That's it. That's my week. This week is solving that issue because I don't have any other shows. And those of you who haven't heard on the Nerd Halen site, Eddie Trunk said some lovely things about the show. I appreciate that greatly. As a huge Kiss fan, he and I have had our differences in the past, but I appreciate him at least recognizing the heavy lifting that I'm doing and the professionalism with which I delivered it. It was as ringing a praise as I could ever expect from him, and I appreciated it greatly. It was very nice. Who do you think writes the Trump speeches now? It's still Stephen Miller and those guys. And it's basically a cut and paste job. That's all. They take chunks and they reorganize it, and then he blathers. It's not a process. They're still leaving shit in from a year ago that's not even a talking point anymore. Anyways, I'm going to sign off. I'll let you guys go. I do need a day of vocal rest because I've been burning myself down. I'm surprised I can still speak as well as I can, and I will attribute that to learning to sing with a little more professionalism than I have had in the past. So thank God. And I know that if I had another show like we had the other night, tonight, I could do it. That feels good. That said, I'm not going to overdo it. And you guys are wonderful. And I will see you guys on Monday. So take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. And we'll see you soon.